Jessica's Event Insider panel session. Thank you all for joining us here today. I do want to start off by introducing myself. My name is Jocelyn, and I'll be the host and moderator for today. And in today's Event Insider panel topic, we'll be covering event content is king, tips on finding great speakers. We will have guest speakers shortly join us to dive into their best tips and practices on how to find speakers. Prior to today's session, we ran 3 pre-session polls that many of you have answered. The polls are still available for you to share your thoughts, but before we start today's session, I do want to share some of those responses with you all. The first poll question asked, which channel do you find new speakers? And coming in with 56% of the total voting, organizers find new speakers through referrals, nominations from committees or colleagues. Tied with 17% of the vote, respondents say that the speakers find they find speakers through calls for proposals or calls for abstracts and through other channels. And finally, coming in at 10% of the votes, respondents voted saying that they source speakers through similar events or conferences. So I do want to thank everyone for sharing their thoughts on this poll. And moving on, the second poll asked you all, how do you compensate your speakers? With 38% of the poll votes, participants compensate speakers with travel costs, which include flight and hotels. 28% of respondents voted that they do not compensate their speakers. 28% also say that they cover the speakers' travel cost, meals, and honorariums. And coming in with 11% of participants' votes, they selected that they compensate speakers with travel cost and meals. And the final question we asked our participants was, what would you like to get out of today's session? I always love to hear the feedback of our audience members. So here are some of the responses our participants posted. Deciding keynote content, inspirational speakers versus content experts, reaching out to high profile speakers where we have no connection to them, hints on trends in engaging speakers post-COVID, best place to begin searching for keynote speakers, a sense of how to determine what is going to be popular and how to best promote it, learning a process to vet session speakers and how to attain keynotes with little funding. And as you can see here in our session, there are other responses coming in as well. So I do want to thank everyone for sharing their feedback in the polls, as we will be touching on some of these topics during our discussion among a variety of others of the subject of finding great speakers for an event. If you're interested in viewing more content for event organizers, subscribe to our channel where we will continue to upload interviews with top event professionals and new content on the latest event industry trends. And now I would like to introduce our speakers and begin our discussion. The first panelist I would like to introduce is Jessica Rizza. Jessica is the development coordinator at the Friends of McHenry County College Foundation. She currently works in fundraising with over 10 years of experience. She plans and executes numerous large and small scale funding events while also supporting the planning and execution of community events through volunteer and board work at McHenry County in Illinois. So due to some last minute scheduling conflicts, Jessica is unable to attend our live session today. However, she was generous enough to give us some time to sit with us and prior to today's session to share her insight and tips on event content as well as securing and booking speakers. So after our interview with Jessica, we will continue our conversation live with our second panel speaker here. So we're going to go ahead and start by playing Jessica's interview here first. So just please bear with me as we get that started. Jessica, thank you again for taking the time to sit with me and sharing your advice and tips for finding great speakers. I'm very much looking forward to hearing your insights. So I'm just going to go ahead and get us started here in the first question. So can you share a bit about the event you recently ran, such as how many days it lasted, the number of sessions, speakers, attendees, sponsors, exhibitors, etc. So feel free to share, Jessica.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I can share our most recent event with HUVA was the People in Need Forum. And this event brings together approximately 700, 800 attendees in our community. And the People in Need Forum, it's a one-day event. We start at 8 a.m. and we conclude in the afternoon. And it brings together about 115 exhibitors who showcase basically social service, human service agencies, community services in McHenry County, where we live outside of Chicago. And we have 3 different breakout sessions at this event, which highlights different topics that are helpful to people in our community. So food insecurity, housing, some personal development and professional development. And we had about 27 unique sessions and altogether about 45 speakers for those sessions. So a lot of people came together to make it happen. That's a large community event that I run. I also primarily do fundraising events where we we may have some speakers or keynote speakers, things like that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Jessica. It's really great to see such a big event for the community and all the resources you offer. So that's really great to hear. And now that we have some context of the events you organize, my next question is, can you provide some details a little bit more in depth of the event topics and the speakers that have been part of your events?
Sure. So with the People in Need Forum specifically, that's very much services in our county. So for that event, we're looking for experts in our county who is doing the work, who is involved on that level that can speak to the group to learn more about the resources available. So for People in Need, we're really looking at experts in the field who are working in our county, or maybe they're outside of McHenry County, but they provide services here. And we rely a lot on the service providers in our area and also just on committee work to identify those speakers. And for fundraising events, these are usually stories of impact or educational stories that we're looking for from speakers. So stories of impact may be a client or, a student, an alumni, a donor who has had a good experience with us. And if it's more of an educational cultivation event with fundraising, we have hired outside speakers that kind of align with our desired outcome of the event.
Great, that's really insightful here, Jessica, and it's really great to see how you tailor everything regarding on your events. So thank you so much for that. And moving forward with the next question, in your experience in running events, how do speakers contribute to your event success? Do great speakers highly impact registration or attendee satisfaction?
Sure. Absolutely. People in need, specifically when we have so many speakers, our attendees just wait for that agenda to come out to see what the sessions are and who the speakers are prior to attending. And we definitely see an increase in attendance once we release that agenda and we actually highlight our speakers who's coming on social media and through pre-event promotion and communications on Whova to promote people attending our event and specifically the breakout sessions with certain speakers. So absolutely, speakers elevate our events. And on the flip side of that, if it's more of a keynote for fundraising, sometimes it's the basis of our event. So for example, I work with a women's philanthropy group and we do several events throughout the year. And some are educational and network type events. And we have brought in speakers who we have found through booking agencies or through referrals. And one example of that is we had Jan Field speak, and she is the former president of McDonald's. She's local to Chicago, so that was a great tie for us because we did book through a booking agency with her, and the cost to bring her in, was within our budget because she was local. We didn't have to fly her out or anything like that. So she's also invested in our community and is a strong advocate for development of women in business. So she just fit a lot of different boxes for us, and we were super pleased to bring her in, share her story about becoming the president of McDonald's, connecting with women in the room, and also just like having that base of everyone believing in philanthropy and investing in communities. So promoting her as our keynote, that some people who had no idea about our organization came just to hear her speak.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. That's a really great experience, Jessica. I mean, the power of just giving back and, how much you can give so much to the community is like really great just for your own organization, for your own community as well. And, the people willing to even contribute just by being part of the community as well. So thank you so much for that, Jessica. And as we are slightly already introducing the topic or the main topic of today's panel session, the following questions are about event content and speakers. I know you just briefly covered that right now, but this next question will still cover that. So when planning out your events, your event content primarily, do you prioritize booking speakers first or deciding on the topics first, or vice versa?
Hey, I typically go topics first in event planning and with committees I work with. Tends to be just when we're looking for an event, we kind of review what are the outcomes, what are the goals of the speaker or the breakout sessions, and who is the audience? Because I think that defines, am I working with students at the college since I work at a college? Or is it donors, or is it a community event? So I think the audience and the topics really come first, and then identifying speakers who meet those needs come second. On the flip side of that, sometimes a speaker comes highly recommended. So for the People in Need Forum, we had a gentleman who is local in our community and is works in this community, but does speak nationwide on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we reached out to him, and he had a couple presentations that he does a lot of. So that was an example where a speaker came very highly recommended to us. There was a tie with our community. And so we did reach out to him, and his topic came after, but most of the time we're identifying the topic first and then searching for speakers who, fit all the boxes and can deliver what we're looking for.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Jessica. And yeah, that's true, right? There's always kind of like a balance where a speaker that fits all your boxes already or like fills in all those boxes, then maybe they come first and then going on with the topics from there. But thank you so much for your insight. And while event content is a priority in your case, for your event program, the next step is to find the right speakers for each topic, right? So there are various methods to finding good speakers. Organizers can conduct a call for proposals, or others can leverage nominations and referrals like you just mentioned. Based on your experience, what are the pros and cons for each method?
Sure. I find my most success through referrals, working with volunteer planning committees for our events, for sure. That's the people who are well connected in our community. That's where primarily speakers come for my events that we host here at the college. I think there's definitely pros and cons to both when you're just working on referrals and knowledge in our community that can be limiting, because it's 10 of us on the planning committee, and it's who do we know, who have we heard from, who has come recommended to us. I think there is a big advantage of a call for proposals because you may get new ideas, new connections, new speakers who you just couldn't identify with the people sitting around the table with you. So a great thing about referrals is, these are people who know the speaker, have heard them speak before, or has worked with them. So we know that they're credible and they have the expertise that we're looking for. So that is how most of our speakers are found for my events. I found a lot of success through that, but with a larger event like the People in Need Forum, when we're having over 20 unique breakout sessions, we do get some proposals for that event. Or even in our thank you wrap-up communications, we say, if you're interested in presenting next year, please reach out to us. And sometimes we'll get a few people who reach out to us. We had the Alzheimer's Association reach out to us after that event, like, hey, we have these 3 presentations that we do community-wide all the time. We'd love to give one next year. That wasn't necessarily on our radar, but actually this year we incorporated them in because they had a great presentation. They had people in the area and it wasn't anything new for them. They were comfortable presenters. So it ended up being a great thing.
Awesome. Even like scoping out from different events, right? And if you see that they kind of align with what you're probably planning for your next event, that's another great opportunity to even kind of do a quick, calls of proposals, or like a quick process to getting a referral from other events. So thank you so much for that, Jessica. That's really great to hear. It looks like you kind of have already a pretty good process for both call for proposals, and it's very interesting from the past event, you're already kind of having a call to action for the next speakers to, kind of also be able to participate in the upcoming events. So much for that. And while we're having a great conversation about the way speakers contribute to running and organizing your events, my next question is about how do you know you're on the right track with your event topics and speakers? In your experience, do you conduct survey sessions or session surveys to understand if the topic or speakers are attractive to the attendees or they're aligning with the attendees' wants? Do you use any feedback as a guide to plan for the next events?
Sure. Yes, I always use surveys with all of our events. I think the attendee survey and feedback is great for assessing how successful your event was and then also planning for the next year. So specifically with people in need, we use the session feedback for all of our breakout sessions, and we share that feedback with the planning committee and then also the speakers themselves who would like to see it. And then we do the post-event survey as well, just to do the whole event and get that feedback. One thing we did this year, we were virtual for a couple years due to COVID, and then we were back in person this year. And it was super easy. We had QR codes in all the rooms, so most people had a cell phone that they could just scan the QR code, take the survey right away, right when the session ended. We found great success with that. And with the post-event survey, we send out, post-event thank yous through the communication channels to all attendees and encourage them to take a survey. So we love reviewing those after event, just hearing how attendees' experience was. And we always at planning kickoff meetings for the following year kind of review those, if there were a lot of things that came back, several people commented on ways we can improve or change or things they want to see come back because they liked it so much. We note those, and that helps us kick off planning for the next year. And I think just with the use of technology, it is so great to just have those surveys, export it right out of Whova. It's very easy for us, and it's something that we really appreciate from our attendees who take the time to do those surveys for us.
Awesome. That's really great to hear, Jessica. And just a quick follow-up for that one. So when you do conduct your session surveys or get any of the feedback from your attendees, are they done through Whova or do you use other channels as well?
They are done through Whova. For People in Need was our last one. So we did the session feedback for the breakout sessions and the post-event survey, all done through Whova.
Awesome. And then I'm assuming it was a pretty easy, just, exporting a Excel spreadsheet and then kind of compiling things that align with the next event planning, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Prior to using Whova, it was a individual paper responses that were then manually entered into an Excel sheet. Now it's all done on Whova. Most people just do it on their cell phone, on the app. We also have computers available since we're at a community college where people can do a survey on their way out. But yeah, it's super easy. Just export it into an Excel sheet through from Whova is what we do. And it's easy for us to review that data.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Jessica. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And to wrap up our interview session here, this is my last question for you. Do you have any additional words of wisdom or advice you wish to share with our audience members that we probably didn't cover here in today's interview?
I would just say that working with the planning committee is definitely key to my success. I'm at a foundation for a community college, and really having the support of community members and donors and people who believe in what you're doing has been a huge success because they're the best in giving referrals or advice or saying like, hey, I saw this person or I know this person. And also just never being afraid to ask. I had a superintendent of a large school district just volunteer his time to speak. I was like, he's way too busy. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to reach out to him. And you just never know who's going to say yes and believe in what you're doing and want to help make your event successful. So definitely just lean on who you can and don't be afraid to reach out to people to help with your event.
Yeah, you never know who's willing to just give back and being part of like a community and just, you never know. So you can't always take your shot, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, Jessica, thank you so much again for sharing your thoughts on today's panel topic. I really appreciate you taking the time to joining today's interview to share your expertise and words of wisdom here with our audience members. So thank you again so much for today and for your time.
All right, thank you.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We hope you learned a few new things from Jessica's insights, and I do want to give a final thanks and a quick shout out to Jessica Rizza for her time and sharing her tips on how to plan event content, and finding great speakers for organizing events. So now it's time for our live discussion with our second guest speaker. I'm now going to introduce Gail Mitchell. Gail is the coordinator at the Accredited Certifier Association. Gail, welcome and thank you for joining us here today. Please feel free to introduce yourself to our audience members.
Yes, thank you all so much for having me. My name's Gail Mitchell. I'm currently working for Accredited Certifiers Association. We work in coordination with the National Organic Program to make sure there's integrity in organic certification. And I've got about 20 years of event planning experience in a bunch of different realms. Jessica did such a great job touching on a bunch of stuff today. So I'm going to try to stay away from all the answers that she gave and provide some new content. But that was, I think, a great start.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Gail. And I'm looking forward to hearing your insights and about event content and securing speakers. So let's get right into it with this first question. And just like Jessica, how I started with her interview, can you share some details about your most recent event? For example, the number of days of the event, the number of attendees, speakers, exhibitors, etc.
So we just finished 2 3-day events, one in person, and this was our first in-person event since 2020. So super exciting to be back in person. And then a second event in February, which was also 3 days, and it was all online. So we really have 2 separate audiences that we're trying to reach. The in-person is a more managerial level employee, and the online is more of kind of your daily worker. So we had very separate content really geared towards those 2 audiences. I would say we probably had about 25 sessions at each event, and for any of those 1 to 5 speakers. So if we're doing a panel, there might be, as many as 5. I try to team up my speakers in groups of 2. That seems to be a good way for us to work. And I think it also keeps one particular viewpoint or person from kind of monopolizing a topic. So that's kind of how we approach that. I was just looking to see what other questions I might be able to answer there. And we had about 200 attendees in person and 500 or 600 online. And these people come from all over the world. So that's another kind of challenge that we have too, is trying to make sure, obviously we can't possibly touch on every time zone, but with Whova, being able to record them and kind of watch them later, that really makes a big difference and encourages people who maybe can't watch live to come back, pay the registration fee, and, engage with the content later on.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for providing some more context on your events. I do want to get into a little bit more details about the type of event topics and the speakers that you select for your events. So can you kind of elaborate a little bit more about that?
So this year, this was my first year. I was new to this company and I was new to this event. Like I said, this was the first time we had been in person since 2020 also. So just trying to make something that was really worthwhile. Obviously, with inflation and the cost of everything being kind of high, it's super important to me always to provide a lot of value in these events. But I think this year in particular, just knowing that this was, I don't know. I wouldn't say travel is still risky or assembling in groups is still risky, but for some people, certainly, they feel like there's a risk and you want to make sure that it's worth it for them. So I had a committee that was left over from before that was able to help me. Coming into the industry, I just didn't really know very many people or what really the topics of interest were going to be. The committee really helped kind of zero in on topics that were interesting and connect those to speakers, people that they already knew. And I did have the Whova feedback from the previous year's online conference. So I was able to also use that just to see what topics people had said, oh, we'd like to hear more about this, or this is a person I would like to hear more from. So I did have that as a resource to use as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Gail. And I'm going to now go ahead and introduce kind of the main points for today's topic for our panel discussion. And I want to follow up with this next question. So in your events, how do speakers contribute to your event success? In your experience, do great speakers highly impact registration and attendee satisfaction?
I think attendee satisfaction, definitely. Like Jessica was saying, I think it's topic first. That's how I pick it. And I think that's also how people register. Is this germane to me, right? Is this going to be relevant in kind of my day-to-day career? And I ask in the survey at the end, was the content relevant to the job that you do every day? And then kind of have people rate that. So I think they are super important. Speakers are hard because a lot of us, just looking at the different organizations people were coming from when you were doing the roll call, I mean, everybody kind of has a different expectation of what there should be. And I think some of the content for us is very technical. And so it can lead to just being kind of awful. And I don't mean it that it's awful. I just mean that no matter who presents it, it's just very dry, kind of rules-based information. And I think if that is your kind of wheelhouse and that's what you're doing, we have found ways to kind of make that fun and engaging by using like a case studies lightning round. So people would use the polls function to, answer, okay, if you're presented with X rule, how would you apply, this information? And then they see if they were right or not, what percentage of them got it right. And I think they find sessions like that. So having a speaker who, while they may be presenting content that is not just scintillating, they do have that way of interacting with the audience as opposed to just reading slides, does make a difference. And that's really something that I'm looking for in a speaker, is some dynamicism, I guess, right? To be a bit more dynamic. But that's really hard when you don't know people, right? So you're taking a lot of recommendations, and just kind of seeing how it goes. I am going to use the session feedback this year also, so I can have a little more granular level feedback as opposed to the bigger feedback that I use for the kind of conference survey.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Gail. That was really insightful and kind of really great tips as well. Finding speakers that, even though they're presenting technical information or very dry information, having some dynamic activities can kind of still keep your audience members engaged for the sessions. So much for that. And I know you briefly covered this for my next question, that you prioritize the event topic first. So I guess I want to go a little bit more in depth with that. What's your process and considerations with defining a little bit more of your event topics for each event?
So I was very fortunate to come out of this year's 2 events with a pretty good list. I would say probably 25 topics of things people were super interested in. Right now in the organic industry, we also have this great big new rule that's coming out. So people are super hyped about talking about it, anxious about it, all the things. So that kind of provides me some natural content. And I also came out with a list of speakers. So at the end of at the survey, at the end of the conference, I said, if you would like to speak, much like Jessica was saying, if you're interested in speaking or somebody that you would recommend, put their name here. So I also have that list that I'm working for. So my plan going forward for this year is to take the list of the topics that people are interested in and the speakers that were recommended and let them have first crack, emailing them and just saying, you were recommended. These are the topics we're interested in covering. Is any of this interesting? Do you feel like you have expertise in any of these areas? And kind of let them cherry pick what they might be interested in. Once I have that information back, I can go either back to the speakers who are none of this is interesting to me, but here's some things I might like to talk about. Okay, fine. Or here's some topics that we didn't get covered. Who do I know or who can I use to kind of find somebody to cover these topics? Because obviously, especially if multiple people suggested them, it's something that I definitely feel like I should at least give some weight to. Like I said, when I only have been in this position about 7 months, so I'm still really getting to know people, but I find, of course, my colleagues are very helpful. There's a number of people from any number of organizations I could email and say, hey, do you know who is the rock star? Who would you really like to hear from on this topic? And they would help. I also farm LinkedIn pretty aggressively, just trying to go through there and figure out who my contacts are and who my contacts are. Is there somebody there who might be a person that I could kind of reach out to and either ask to speak or again, ask, who is the person? If you could just hear from one person on this topic, who's the person you'd want to hear from? So I kind of use those things hand in hand to try and get the right speakers into the room, but also find speakers that are, I think, engaging. And of course, it's a lot of work, right? To put together maybe an hour-long presentation. So somebody who's interested, in doing that. Not everybody has the time right now to do that thing for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Gail. So it kind of looks like you kind of already covered a little bit of the method of, using your network or your network's network to kind of find new speakers that can align with the event topics you've already are prioritizing. So aside from that kind of method of finding speakers, there's also another way organizers secure and source resource speakers, which is call for proposals. And obviously, you just mentioned leveraging recommendations of referrals or committee members or colleagues. So based on your experience, what are some of the pros and cons for those type of methods, for each method?
I mean, I will definitely be using call for proposal, and it does give you kind of a high level view, right, of the people you're getting. And I think you can kind of do some background digging, right? My general feeling is that nobody wants to embarrass themselves in front of their colleagues. So these are usually people who are going to put forward a good effort because, why would you recommend yourself, right, if you're not going to do a good job? But I will say that even in the speakers that were recommended to me this year, not everybody's great at keeping deadlines or keeping me updated. I usually ask for an outline to be submitted ahead of time so that I can keep them progressing along the path that makes me comfortable. Not everybody's willing to work that way, and I understand that. So there are some kind of things that I hold back on. Even if I know you're a great speaker, if you're going to be somebody who's going to last minute me and cause me anxiety and stress, I might set that proposal aside, or I would have to weigh it much more carefully than I would somebody that I know to be kind of a person who meets deadlines and is reliable. And that's really because of my working style, right? That's the way that I need things to be for me to have a good conference. I mean, finding people, the kind of shortcoming I found this year is that when people recommend people in the industry, I'm getting the same names over and over and over again, and it doesn't provide a lot of diversity in the experience, in the age, in the background of the speaker. And for me, if I'm going to pay a couple $100s to go to a conference, I don't want to hear the same shtick, and that's not to say that one person can't put together multiple good presentations about different topics, but I just want to see somebody new, right? So as much fun as it is to watch Harry Potter 100 times, it's also fun to go watch a new movie, but two things can be true. So this is kind of also where I am. And I just don't know enough right now to do a super good job in finding new talent, but I am very acutely aware that I am not looking to have the same people present this year that did last year. I'm not looking to have the same people present online that presented in person, no matter how good they are. And it's not a dig at them. It's that I want to open the pipeline for new, young, different opinioned people to kind of come and do their part. And I mean, speaking is something at a conference you can use on your resume. I want to make sure people have that opportunity if that's something they're looking for. So that was kind of the long way of getting around to the answer for call for proposals versus, recommendations. But hopefully that's useful to somebody.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Gail. And just from this quick analysis, each have their benefits and values. So I kind of want to circle back a little bit to dive into the approach you are further going to take for the calls of proposal method. So some of the questions I have for that is how will you manage to get more submissions if you already have some plan for that, and the reviewing process and what you're going to take into consideration for sourcing your speakers with the call for proposals.
Those are good questions. And I'll be honest, I'm working through this process in my brain currently. So what I'm going to tell you today is probably not exactly how it will play out, but how I envision it going in a perfect world. We have a newsletter subscriber list of about 1,500 people. So that is probably where my call for proposals will go out first. We're also a nonprofit membership organization. So I have about 70 members who have a point of contact, and I might also start there. So working two channels at the same time and just saying, hey, you've got an organization with a lot of qualified people in it. Send me, who would you like to see? Who would you want representing you? Who do you think has some insight or some exciting things they would like to talk about? And do that. For the call for proposals, for the newsletter, I envision it being more kind of like a Google form where, hey, we're looking for this. These are the dates and times we're looking for speakers. And then just having them kind of go through online, in person, what is the cost? What's cost going to be to me, and offering them some options there, and then having them pitch me a, possible some possible topics. Here's the thing I would like to talk about, and provide a brief outline of that. Some other thing I am considering, and I'm still, again, chewing on this one, is this idea of 5 minutes. I think it's 5 minutes, like 10 slides, or 5 minutes, 15 slides, where you do like this lightning round presentation, which I think would enable people to both stick their toe in the presentation water. It would be inexpensive. I wouldn't necessarily have to pay these people. These are people who would be coming to the conference already. And then also it would give me a chance to see just enough of them to know if I wanted to maybe use them again in another, in another conference or in another avenue, because we also do a series of lunch and learns every month. So I'm also always looking for content and speakers for those. So I'm kind of toying with that idea. I'm not sure how to present it to my audience to make sure that they understand what exactly I'm looking for. So I need to learn a little bit more so I can speak a little more intelligently about that. But that's something I think that also would be very energizing as a breakout session, where you could just go and see 10 topics right over the course of an hour. And just, I don't know, and then maybe do a networking session after that to get to meet some people. So those are kind of some things that I'm using to get me to where I need to be for next January and February.
Awesome. It sounds like your plan is to capitalize every opportunity to secure some speakers for all the event content and events you plan on moving on. So Gail, I do wish you the best of luck, and I hope your plan goes to fruition here.
Me too. And one thing I didn't say is that I have no shame in pilfering other conferences speakers. So I will go through their agenda. I will look and see who they have that's speaking. Are these topics germane? Is this interesting? And I have no trouble reaching out to those people. Clearly they were able to do it once, right? So, no reason they should
do
be
it
able
again.
to do it. Yeah. I mean, and I think you kind of have to be like a little bit, have this guerrilla tactic, because if you have, all these sessions to fill, you need some people to do it, and you don't want to repeat the same content over and over and over.
Yes, being very proactive, highly proactive is a good takeaway here. So thank you so much for that, Gail. I'm sure our audience members are learning a great deal from our discussion already. I do want to make a little quick sidebar here for our audience members. If you are joining us, thank you so much. As we are going here on our live discussion with Gail, and you do have any questions, please head on over to the Q&A section to type any questions you may have, as we are covering those in just a few moments here in our next segment. So other than that, I'm going to move on to the next question here with you, Gail. And this is about how to secure your speakers when inviting guest speakers, primarily even a keynote speaker. What are the likelihood that they are going to accept? And how do you manage to get backup speaker invites in case your first picks aren't able to kind of attend your event via speaker?
I mean, like Jessica was saying, you got to shoot your shot, right? At some point, you need to just ask. And I don't think there's any harm in emailing somebody you have never met in your life and providing them, with some information. Obviously, you don't want to just say, hey, can you come speak at my event? But I had emailed up an author a couple of weeks ago and just said, your content in your book was very enlightening. This is the topic I'm looking to engage with this group. This is these are the 2 possible days that I have where we could do this. Can you let me know your speaker fee, travel, whatever else you're included? Now, she came back, as I mentioned earlier, with a price of $12,000. That is way outside of our budget, but clearly, within the budget of others. She has speaker information on her website. So it both hurt my feelings. And also I was like, okay, well, I kind of guessed it might be more than we could afford, but I didn't know how much it would be. So going to your trade association, we have the Organic Trade Association, or other groups like that. Education people might obviously have their own groups, things like that. And looking, they often will have some speakers listed on their website and kind of give you a little bit of their background. So that's probably the next place that I will go. And just try and match what I think the theme of the conference is going to be with what this person's area of interest or expertise is. If you give them enough time, I don't know that you need to really worry too much about having a backup. I mean, if you're inviting a congressperson, yes, you might need to have a backup there. But once somebody says, yes, this is the day, yes, this is the time, yes, this is the fee. I don't have people sign contracts. It probably would be prudent to do that, especially if you're getting somebody who maybe is more high profile, or if you're getting Oprah, I feel like she's got a team for that, right? I'm clearly not. I don't have an Oprah budget. So I'm not super worried about backups. Stuff happens, people get sick, planes get delayed. You need to have buffers for those things already built into your schedule. But it's easy enough to flip a keynote from breakfast one day to lunch the next, right? I mean, that's not that much of an ask. I think regular speakers are a bigger danger. This year I had one get food poisoning. We had a COVID outbreak at our in-person meeting. So there were a lot of things that really could have gone even maybe worse than they did. But yeah, I mean, I'm in the process of doing that now. I'm pretty confident that I will find somebody. But then earlier we were talking about inspirational keynotes versus topical. And I mean, I am just of two minds. I think it has to be somewhat topical, right? I'm not going to bring in somebody who understands nothing about agriculture or organics or fruits and vegetables. It's got to be somewhat logical. But on the other hand, I do feel like, if you're going to travel, especially if you're doing this in person, or you're going to sit in front of your computer for days, you really need to get one little great nugget out of this conference that you can take back. And maybe that is feeling like jazzed about your work and ready to go back. I was in sales for a long time. I definitely needed that push to like keep going out there when I would go to those conferences. Or, just a tip that you can kind of use in your everyday life to make things better. So that's really that value. That's what I'm looking for. And that's the word I keep going back to, is there has to be value for this. So if I'm just having somebody up there for flash, that to me I wouldn't spend my money on that. I really need somebody to be scribbling down notes like a crazy person and saying, oh my gosh, yes, this is so illuminating. And if they happen to feel good about it too, then all the better.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Gail. And just to kind of stay here on the topic of still booking speakers, this is a little bit more on the logistical side, which is not going to introduce the second or the third portion here of our interview. When is an appropriate time to start inviting guests? I know being proactive is very important. It's crucial. So do you have kind of time frames when you should start inviting guest speakers?
I mean, if you want the people you want, you need to ask them well in advance. So our meeting's just wrapped up. My meeting is not until the last week of January in 2024. I am inviting people now because it's important to me, and I want to be respectful, especially too for my online component. If they want to record their presentation, I need time to run that through the appropriate channels. So I don't necessarily just let them click record and then they talk and then I don't edit it at all, right? That we have the person who does some of that stuff for us, and I need to give them time to do their work. So there are some considerations like that. And then obviously too, financially, if you're booking a bunch of airline tickets, if people are coming from overseas, the earlier you book those, sometimes the better deal you can get. And I often will book flights and hotels for my speakers so that I can control the cost, because I am a bit of a control freak, but I do, and it's not to say I'm happy to reimburse them for whatever, but I do usually say when there's a flight, I need it to be, under $400, or we'll reimburse you up to $400. Just because that's what our budget will bear. Again, if it's somebody I really, really want, I have room to make exceptions for that and kind of some room in my budget to deal with that. But, I don't think you can ever ask somebody too early, because also what if they say no and you're like, okay, well, that was kind of my one person I had for this topic. I need to go back to the well and figure out. And I would say, if they turn me down, I would say, is there somebody that you would recommend that you would like to have? I mean, again, I'm totally shameless in the asking, because they do usually have a friend, a colleague, somebody that they would recommend.
Awesome. Yeah. It's never afraid. You should never be afraid to ask, if your first speaker can't do it, do you have someone else that you can recommend? Always,
Yes.
The end goal is to always find speakers for your sessions. So
right.
Why not?
And you can keep this person in mind. And I usually say, do you mind if I keep you on my list for in the future? And they'll say, oh, no, that's fine. But right now I'm having, whatever crisis. So I can't deal with your stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And just to follow up with this topic, what is the response time frame that you give your speakers to accept when you invite them?
Sorry, you all, I work from home, and this is just one of the many perils. If you're inviting them early enough, it's not such a big deal. I feel like the timeline's not so tight. Last year, so I started in June and I had the meeting in January. So it was probably I don't know, August or September before I started inviting people. And then it was imperative. So I would kind of say, dear so-and-so, you're recommended by the committee. This is the topic they'd like you to discuss. And I would copy and paste from our little Excel sheet what the topic was exactly and the description of it. These are the dates of the event. Here's the timeline that we're working on. This is when I would need an outline. This is when I would need your preliminary slides. This is when I would need your final slides. Can you let me know if this is something that you'd be interested in? I'll follow up with you on X. And then I would put a date, maybe 7 to 10 days. Of course, if you get an out of office, because it was summer, you might need to bump that back a little bit. But I think that's a week is enough time to know if you're interested. That's really the question I'm asking, right? Are you interested in this? Can we talk more about this? And I didn't have a ton of time because I felt very much under the gun to get some speakers on the board and kind of get things moving. Having our conference in January too presents a kind of unique challenge because we have right before that Thanksgiving holiday, the Christmas holidays, Hanukkah, all these things, New Year's, where no one is working. And I kind of knew that I needed to back myself out about 6 weeks because no one was going to do any constructive presentation creating between Thanksgiving and the New Year, right? They're either, I'm going to get it done so it's done and over, or I'm not going to touch it until January the 3rd. That caused me a lot of anxiety. So I knew I had that kind of window to build in, but I don't think there's any harm in just saying, can you get back to me in a week? That seems to me to be a professional courtesy people would extend.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that insight here, Gail. And as we continue with our discussion, I do want to move on with this next topic, which is pertaining to logistics to speakers. So I'll start. And I think you already kind of briefly mentioned this already in this past question, which is about speaker compensation. This is a form of appreciation event organizers offer to speakers for their time and services. So as we just saw in our live session poll, there are many different ways that event organizers compensate. So Gail, what are the type of compensations you offer to your speakers?
So in the past with the organization that I'm with, it was very much volunteer and no one got anything. And the new executive director and I are very strongly moving away from that as a model. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's the kind of people we want to be. And I am not in any way suggesting if someone's doing this, that this is bad. I'm saying for our organization, based on the work that we're currently involved in, we feel the need to provide some kind of compensation. So for some people, compensation is a discounted registration fee. It might be half price. It might be a full, the full registration. It kind of depends on where they fall on the spectrum. For a panelist, where I feel like you don't necessarily have to prepare to be a part of a panel, right? We're just asking questions and kind of having a dialogue. We gave $40 gift cards, just Visa gift cards. For speakers, it kind of depended on where they fell. So if I'm asking someone who's not attending my conference to fly to another state, stay overnight, eat food, I pay for all those things and I pay for a speaker fee because they aren't getting anything out of being there other than, a check in a box on their resume. And I'm happy to do that. But obviously I can't afford to do that for 20 people. So this has to be kind of a limited number of people. If they're people who are already coming to my conference anyway, it depends again. If you are being paid for, if your registration for the conference is being paid for by your company, it doesn't seem fair to me to discount your registration because you're not getting anything. So for that person, I would say, would you like a discounted registration or would you prefer an honorarium? Which I'm $150, kind of depending on their expertise, how long the session is, what they're talking about. Are there multiples, right? Are they sharing the load with somebody? That's where that would be. And then if it's somebody who is paying their own way, then a free registration can be a really good deal. I am not in love with this mishmash method that I have, but with what I started with, this is kind of the where I could go with that. I'm still working to refine that. We do, for our Lunch and Learns, have an option for people to donate their fee back to our organization. And that sometimes is a nice way of me being able to offer, a good sum of money and then them saying, no, thank you, I don't want that. So that is an option that some of them have taken. But I definitely am refining and kind of rethinking this both from a cost perspective so that we can keep our costs down. And I don't want to have to raise ticket prices every year, right? I mean, at some point you kind of hit what the max ticket price can be when you have to couple that with hotel and food and everything. But on the other hand, I need to have really quality speakers. So it's a delicate balance. And if I spend out a ton, like on a keynote, then I don't necessarily have as much for the other things. So is it worth it? Is there value again in that for me? And I think this can be really hard. I do always, when I'm emailing people to ask if they'll speak, ask what their speaker fee is. So I know if they come back and they say it's $500, then I know what it is. And if they're like, oh gosh, I don't know, I've never thought about it, I might suggest, well, would you prefer a discounted registration or a $250 honorarium or what? The problem with giving people money also is that then you get into I need your W-9, I've got to include you on my taxes. And that may be a thing that people just, you don't want to get involved in. And that's totally, I understand that completely too. It's a lot. You create work for yourself, both on the front end and on the back end.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Words of wisdom, Gail. It's very interesting, and it looks like you're still kind of fine tuning, your compensation breakdown and process. But I see that the main theme is to find speakers that provide great value for your sessions and events. So from our discussions here, we see speakers contribute a lot to running and organizing an event. So this next question is about knowing if you're on the right track with your event topics and speakers, and that you're kind of getting your money's worth for certain speakers. So just like Jessica, I do want to ask you, do you conduct session surveys to understand if topics or speakers are attractive to attendees? And again, how do you use this feedback as a guiding plan for future events?
This year, I didn't use the session feedback. I have added it to my package for next year because I really do want to know what you think about that topic in that moment. And I think it's important that they fill it out then, right? Because you leave, you go on, other things happen, and then your memory is not so clear. So, but we did do the conference feedback, and I did get a lot, and sometimes very good, very insightful, useful information. And if someone says something complimentary about a speaker, I always make sure to pass that on after the conference. Hey, I just wanted to let you know, people loved your session. Here are a few of the comments, so that people know. If they didn't, then I usually keep that to myself and just kind of move on with that knowledge. So yeah, I mean, I think the session feedback will be very helpful in the future, and I'm looking forward to having that kind of day of information. But knowing too that I'm not interested in continuing to churn the same group of speakers every year, I need to kind of put an asterisk by it, right? And make sure it's more content than less delivery. Is the content useful? Was it presented in a useful way? Some people just read PowerPoints, and that is just how it is. And I don't think any of us enjoy having PowerPoints read to us or being able to read along while someone's doing it. But I also think that nobody trains you to be a speaker, right? By and large, for the most part, you're either somebody who can get up in front of an audience and be engaging, or you're not. So that part is a little more up to the wind, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Gail. And we're approaching here the end of our panel discussion. So I'll be closing out with this final question. Gail, do you have any additional tips on finding great speakers that we probably didn't cover in the discussion here today?
I would say if you have like a lot of government speakers, I would just say be careful because they can't always take money, gifts, things like that. So that's just a weird little niche thing that probably a lot of people don't encounter, but some of us will. And so that might be a useful tip somebody can take home. They also are sometimes very cautious about what they say. So you need to know that kind of going in.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. It's actually a really useful tip. Sometimes you might not even consider that. And, they're probably really high profile speakers and they work in the government sector, and then there's a lot of caveats or hurdles with getting them there. So thank you so much for that tip, Gail. And this concludes our panel discussion. We will now moving over to the live Q&A portion of today's session. So I'm just going to go ahead and get right into it with the most popular question here. And this is from James Porter, is it okay to pay some speakers and not others, or does that backfire when one finds out that the other one got paid? So Gail, do you have any experience with that?
Yes, I do. And but no, what I will say, I didn't have any blowback. Now I'm working with an organization that, in person, roughly 200 people. Like I said, the online people kind of never the twain shall meet, right? They're all functioning a bit in their own silo. But I will say that this seems to be kind of specific to my industry too. Like they were all really used to volunteering and not getting paid at all. And I was just gobsmacked by the fact that people would fly to New Orleans and spend days of their time and not expect anything in return, which is not to say that I haven't done that as a speaker, but something, right? And I even after the conference sat down and wrote thank you notes and sent like some $25 Target gift cards to people who I felt like we had 2 speakers where the AV went out and the girls are up there just winging it. And they had some little props that they had brought, thank God, but I really just felt like they had gone above and beyond. So I made sure to acknowledge that because it was such a just bad position to put them in. Nothing anybody could have done. But yeah, I mean, just be careful. That's all I would say. Be careful.
Yeah, be very discreet, right?
Yes.
In that. All right. Thank you so much, Gail. And I'm going to move on here with this next question from Gerard. And his question is, what's the best way to convince a conference the need for a speaker budget when they're historically haven't paid any speakers? We're struggling to find fresh speakers the last several years. So kind of convincing your committee, your event planning committee, to kind of give you a budget for speakers.
Gerard, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. So yeah, when I went back and I'm like, well, I need all this money. And my executive director's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, we haven't been paying these people. She's like, oh, well, that's wrong. I'm like, yeah. So the scenario I'm in is that we have this online training that doesn't cost us very much, but we generate a lot of revenue off of it because it is online. I don't have to pay for food or hotels or whatever. I use that as a cash cow for my other in-person meeting, which is very expensive, I think. And maybe instead of just asking for the money, maybe this is an area where you could look for sponsors or exhibitors to kind of help offset the cost of that. So this speaker, this keynote, let's just say your keynote's $2,500. This keynote is sponsored by X, whoever X is in your industry. Maybe they could do that and you could use that to kind of offset the cost. And the same thing with speaker fees. I think too, that kind of frog in boiling water. So, frog starts in cold water. Maybe this year you can't offer them any money, but incrementally, just know over 3 years, we're going to raise it to a minimum of, let's say, $150 or whatever seems fair to you. At some point you have to be very frank and say, well, here's what I can get for free, right? I mean, free is free. And sometimes there's a cost to free that's too much. Sometimes it's worth paying somebody a little bit to do something because that's the only way to get the thing you want. And I think depending on how your organization is, you can say those things or not.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Gail. That's very useful here. And then I have another question from Tanya, and this is very suggestive, but would it be worth it to have a virtual keynote? Have they resonated well with an in-person audience, or do they fall flat? Gail, do you have any experience with?
I don't, but I think it would be great. If it makes it within your budget. Now, again, the speaker is the whole thing, right? If you get somebody who just isn't dynamic in person or on the internet, then no. But I think if it were me, then I would look for somebody I know I had seen virtually and had really done a good job. This is where you kind of go to your Instagram influencer type person, right? Or YouTube star, that kind of person. that might put that within your budget. So yeah, I think if it's somebody who's just going to put up a bunch of slides, no, but yeah, vet them first, but I think that would be a great way to save some money.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really true, right? Try to vet a virtual speaker that is very engaging online. That could be a good way to kind of know which is a good keynote speaker. I am now seeing here that we are on the hour mark. So I know we still have some questions here that were unanswered, but I am going to wrap up today's session since I want to be considerate of everyone's time. Gail, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you sharing your experience, your thoughts so candidly, and even, your process for the upcoming events. I know I learned a lot from you as well from Jessica's interview as well. So I hope our audience members did as well. So again, Gail, thank you so much for your time and experience and thoughts here. And to those of you in the audience, thank you so much for joining us, participating, and asking great questions. It was a pleasure hosting this session, and I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I have. Before we log off, I do want to let everyone know that the recording of today's session will be available on Whova's YouTube channel. So you will receive an announcement once it's available for viewing. In the meantime, you can also check out our past sessions and other content on the Whova YouTube channel if you're interested. Other than that, thank you all once again for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone.